said I wasn't going to do a summary, but I'm going to do a quick summary, real quick one. It won't even be 3 minutes. So, book of Hebrews, we're going to be in chapter 2, and God's word of encouragement in the first chapter was, Lord lifts us up. We looked at Hebrews chapter 13, verse 22. We looked at the intros written to the Jews to help encourage him to remain in Christ Jesus, to remain true to him. They were looking back, a lot of them. They were falling, going back into the law and leaving Jesus. So we have to keep that in mind. The key word of the book is hold. The key word is hold fast. We looked at the theme in Hebrews chapter 8 and verse 1, and the theme about Jesus being our great high priest. It starts out basically, let me tell you what this is about. We have a high priest sitting next to God on the throne of the majesty on high. So Jesus is at God's side, but he is on our side. Chapter 1, verse 2 through, chapter 2 through verse 4, the word of encouragement in that chapter, in the first chapter, was guidance. Through the messenger, Jesus guided each and every one of us to God. He guides the weak back to God when the weak are falling. We looked at those 5 credentials. And Jesus is the prophet of God. He's the priest of God, the high priest. He's the power of God. He's in his place right there on the right hand of God up on the throne. And then we looked at prestige, the creator of the heavens and the earth, the great I am, that Yahweh, right? He is our true God. All right, so let's get into chapter 2, where we'll be looking at verses 5 through 18. Our word of encouragement tonight for this chapter is peace. I know we all love to be at peace. Nobody wants to be where their heart's not peaceful, where their life's not peaceful. But we do have a problem in our life, in the world. What is that problem that we all face? Sin. Yeah, it is sin. But there's something that rests behind sin. We're looking at another self-worth, which leads us to sin, which leads us to not have peace in our lives. Starts with an S. Self. Self, yes, that's right. We want to do what we want to do at times, don't we? The self problem leads to the sin problem. Look at James chapter 1. If someone wants to read James chapter 1, verse 14 and 15, please.
Let no one say when he is tempted, I am tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he himself tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when he is drawn away by his own desires and enticed. Then when desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is full grown, brings forth death.
Yeah, sin comes from when we are led away by what? You just said that word, and we might have a different word. Huh? Our own desires, and then also yours might say lust. Right? Mine says lust. Yeah, desires, lust, thing. Basically, we do what we want to do. And I'm not saying you, me. At times we could do that, but people in general, right? They just selfish, and it's a self problem. They do what makes them feel good. That's what the world knows. That's not to be in our lives as God's people, right? That we can't have a self problem and then be pleasing to God. Jesus said in I think it's in Matthew 26, verse 24, he says, if anyone wants to come after me, he needs to do what? Deny himself. Yeah, that's right. And take up his what? His cross. Take up his cross, and he says, and follow me. Yeah, that the cross represents death, right? So what he's basically saying there, we got to put to death self. We got to put to death that selfish desire that really we have in human nature, in ourselves. So 2, 5 through 18 is going to address this. It's going to address our self problem so we can take care of the sin problem. What is the result? The result then, therefore, is our word. We will have peace. Right? I know there's a lot of things in this life that work on us, that it's hard to find peace in certain times, in certain situations. But really, think about us all here right now. Are you at peace? It looks like every one of you is at peace. I know that I have things going on, and I'm fighting that. I'm like, it's no mystery. I've talked about that, but I do have peace. I do have peace in Christ because I look to Him, and I say that He's the one that's always going to get us through what we go through. As long as we allow Him to. We have to remember that. We have to allow Him to do that. So yeah, we have this peace. All this is accomplished because Jesus' redemptive work, it has been accomplished. So tonight there's going to be two sets of thought as we go through this lesson. We're not going to get through chapter 2, and it's not a race for us to get to the next chapter. We're gonna go slow as possible. And we'll get hopefully get as much out of this as we can. So there's going to be two sets of thought here. The first one is, and I'm just going to say the three words: man. First one is man. The next one, you can put a crown or crown, and then disgrace. Man, a crown, and disgrace. Then our second thought here as we go through this lesson, we're going to look at this soon, is man, a crown, and grace. So think of it. Man, a crown, disgrace. Man, a crown, and disgrace. Disgrace, the first one, grace, the second one. We are to unfold the teachings of God every time we come together. Like tonight, Sunday morning, every time the sermons, we are to internalize those, bring those into our heart, and have that peace of God on our hearts. So it keeps us from that self problem, and ultimately it'll help us not fall into sin. The Hebrew writer here, he gave an exhortation in the first verses that we looked at last week of chapter 2. Now he's going to return to the argument that Jesus is superior. Better, superior. I like the word superior more, but superior over the angels. So let's look at this. Man, a crown, and disgrace as we go through these first verses. Somebody read from verse 5. Just the first part of verse 5 to speaking. We are speaking.
We do not subject the angels to the world to come, about which we are speaking.
Which we are speaking. Thank you. Chapter 1 was a contrast between Jesus and the angels. Verse 4 of that chapter, Jesus superior to the angels, remember we looked at, he has a more excellent name than they. And it begins a comparison. We looked at how angels are ministering spirits. And the angels, they played an instrumental role in bringing God's law to the people on Mount Sinai. We have Deuteronomy 33, 1 and 2, Psalm 68, 17, Acts 7, and verse 38 and 53, and also Galatians chapter 3, and verse 19. Yes, Jesus, the Son of God, called God by God, the great I am, the King of kings, the Lords of lords, the name above all names. And then he said, this world to come. This world to come, basically the age of the Messiah in which we now live. It also talks about this, not those words, but it talks about this later on that we're going to be going through later on in Hebrews chapter 6 and verse 5. Now he says, concerning which we are speaking. Many scholars believe that this is an indication that the Hebrew letter was first spoken in a sermon form. Any comments on this so far, this first part? Okay, verse 6 starts out and states, one has testified somewhere saying, and he's quoting here, and you could make a, yeah, I don't know if I forget if I think I put it on your sheet, but he's quoting from Psalm chapter 8 and verse 4 through 6. He says, what is man that you think of him, or a son of man you are concerned about him? So here it is. Here's our first word here, man. Man. What are we talking about when we see man here? Huh? Yeah. It's not gender. It's not talking about men. It comes from the word anthropos, or it's a Greek word anthropos, which comes from anthropology. So it's the human race. It's the humankind he's talking about. Mankind in general. He says, what is mankind that you are mindful of him? Who did God make lower than the angels? Us, right? Yeah. He made us lower than the angels. But there is a thought out there that the Son of Man here is talking about Jesus. There's been a lot of them referring to that. Psalm 8:4 talks about the Son of Man, not a capital S, because Jesus has often in the New Testament, in the Gospels, he often referred to himself as the Son of Man, right? So people think that's what he's referring to, but it's referring to mortal men. It's not prophetically referring to Jesus in Psalm chapter 8, verse 4. And that's who he's going back to. And so there is that parallelism. I knew I was going to get tongue-tied. A parallelism of Hebrew poetry. What is a parallelism? Yeah, right? I'm going to do the definition right here. A common literary feature of Hebrew poetry in the New Testament is called a parallelism, in which the words of two or more lines of text are directly related in some way. This feature can be found in any poetic passage and sometimes even in narrative, although it is more common in the book of Psalms and Proverbs. So it's stated by these scholars that it demands that the phrase stand only for, this phrase is referring back to Psalm 8:4, to mankind. However, there's some other scholars that state this. F.F. Bruce, in the Epistles of the Hebrews, stated, the fact remains that ever since Jesus spoke of himself as the Son of Man, this expression has had for Christians a connotation beyond its, here we go, etymological force, and it had this connotation for the writer to the Hebrews. In his survey of Hebrews, Jimmy Allen stated this. In other words, the Son of Man meant man, but it was a type of the antitype Christ. And so it appears to have a double meaning. The first application was to mankind, and the second to Christ and his rule. But everything we think about is, in fact, subject to Christ. Everything in this whole world is subject to Christ. Robert Milligan, in his commentary on the Epistles of Hebrews, wrote, and this is a paraphrase, if Son of Man refers only to mankind, then the amazement of the psalmist was that God has such concern over lowly man and has shown so much interest in him. Isn't that amazing that when you can think about how we look at this vast universe and we look at these amazing things that God has created, and then who are we? We are the only ones created in the image and the likeness of God. God has a lot of concern for you and for me. Well, let's look at the first part of verse 7. First part of verse 7, and of course, we're still in that Psalm 8, this is from Psalm 8:5. He says, you have made him. You have made who? Just what we're talking about. Just what Connie says. And when you have made mankind. We are made a little lower than the angels. See, we are continually lower than the angels, that it says in Psalm 8:5. And we're going to come back to this in a little bit. But so we look at here, we have been talking about angels, and we know that Jesus is superior to the angels. Now, when it comes to them, God has not placed the world in subjection under their feet. But he does to someone else what it's saying. He says, what is man? What is humankind? Mankind. In what way are we lower than the angels? How were we created? Isn't our makeup different than the angels? We have a different makeup. Hebrews chapter 1, 7-14 talks about the angels or spirits. You know, we said ministering spirits, spirit beings. Do we have a spirit? Yeah, we have a spirit. We have a soul. However, we are spirit beings living in what type of body? Yeah, we have this physical tabernacle or tent that the Bible talks about. It's physical body. Angels do not have that. Let's turn to 2 Corinthians chapter 4. Somebody read for us tonight 2 Corinthians 4, 16 through 18, please.
Even though our outward man is perishing, yet the inward man is being renewed day by day. For our light affliction, which is but for a moment, is working for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory. 18.
Oh, yeah, 18 too, sorry.
While we do not look at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporary, but the things which are not seen are eternal.
Thank you. So here we're talking about the first word we're talking about is man. Man. Humankind. Now we come to the second word. We're going to come to the word crown. Crown. Hebrews chapters 2, verse 7, the second part of verse 7 states, you have made him for a little while lower than angels. You have crowned him with glory and honor. God is mindful of us. He's crowned man with glory and honor. God made man as a spirit being inside a human physical body. Now, he crowned them with glory and honor. When we look at this word crown, there's two Greek words for the word crown. The first Greek word is diadem, and that's the type of crown for royalty. That's the type of crown that the kings wear. And then there's a second Greek word for crown, and that's stephanos, a crown of victory. It's like crossing, we talked about that before, it's crossing that finish line, running the race to win. You know, Revelations 2:10 says, be thou faithful to death, and I will give you the stephanos of life, the crown of life, the victor's crown. And so those are the two different crowns. Mankind is crowned with glory. So how are we crowned with glory? Because when we think of being crowned with glory and honor, who do we think about? We think of Christ. We think of God. But in a way, we are too. So how are we? Well, that's one way, yes. We are made in his image. But look at verse 8. He gives us the answer in verse 8. Someone read verse 8, please.
You put everything in subjection under its feet.
Foreign, subjecting, keep going.
When subjecting all things to him, he left nothing that is not subject to him. But now we do not yet see all things subject to him.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I used to read this as Jesus. Because, yeah, we are all, of course, subject to Jesus. But in this context here, we're still in that man being crowned. We're going to get to Jesus in a little bit. Not under the angels, the world in subjection under our feet, right? He has crowned us with glory and honor. We have dominion. We have dominion over what? Remember, the creation, right? Genesis chapter 1. Let's look at that in Genesis chapter 1. Somebody go ahead and read when you get there, verse 26 through 20. Let's go through 28.
Then God said, "Let us make man in our own image, after our likeness. And let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him, male and female he created them. And God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth."
Thank you. Yeah, he starts, yours is dominion, right? Someone else might say rule. Yeah, we have dominion over the creation. Physical beings, the human race. We are also spirit beings. God placed the rest of the creation under the care and control of mankind. This is the glory and honor that we have under God. So we have mankind, and we have a crown. Now, number 3 is disgrace. Disgrace. Go ahead and read chapter 2, verse 8, somebody. Hebrews 2:8, yeah.
He hath put all things in subjection under his feet. In that he put all in subjection under him. He left nothing that is not put under him. But now we do not yet see all things put under him.
Yeah, one word that's used repeatedly is you see that word subjection. Right? The Greek word means God has arranged under, there's that word again, under the dominion, under the control and the care of all mankind, all creation, as we just looked at in Genesis 1. But there's one thing that we have trouble with. There's one thing that we can't control. What is that? We started out with that F word. Self. I say S word. I don't think that sounds bad. S word. Let's see. Yeah, self. We are not really able to control self. At times we do sin, don't we? If we say we don't sin, then we're a liar. Let's look at Ephesians chapter 2 together. If I'm going too fast, please tell me. I won't get it perfect. So Ephesians chapter 2, 1 through 4. I can read that if nobody wants to read that. If you have it, go ahead.
"And you were dead in the trespasses and sins in which you once walked, following the course of this world, following the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that is now at work in the sons of disobedience, among whom we all once lived in the passions of our flesh, carrying out the desires of the body and the mind, and were by nature children of wrath like the rest of mankind."
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, think about that. Of course, this is before we've had Christ. We were dead in our trespasses. We were walking in the sinful flesh, and sin could still get us. We still have that lingering because of self. So we must remember that we are not part of the sons of disobedience anymore. But if we're not careful, we can be. We can fall back into our desires. We can fall back into the lust of our flesh. You know, one indication is the Spirit being within us. You think about that. You think about, I know when I do wrong. You most likely know when you do wrong. There's people out there that do wrong all the time, and it's just normal to them. So we have that Spirit within us. And when we do wrong, we're guilty. We feel the guilt. We have that problem that we have to constantly work on. We have not reached the point to control everything. Most of the time, we may be in control, but if we were in total control of ourselves, then we would never sin. Right? And the Bible tells us that we do sin. If we don't sin, then we are a liar, and the truth is not in us. 1 John 1:8, but if we say that we have no sin, we are deceiving ourselves, and the truth is not in us. 1 John 2:1 says, but if any man sin, we have an advocate with the Father and with Jesus Christ, the righteous one. That is so comforting to know that when we sin, we have that advocate. We have Jesus as that mediator between us and God. Because we all do at times fall into the desires of the flesh. Paul talked about in Romans 7. Paul had that problem. He's an apostle, and Paul struggled with that war between his flesh and between the Spirit. Galatians 5:17 tells us about constant war. So let's look at the summary for the first part of Hebrews 2. We have man, humankind, or mankind, created a little lower than the angels. We have a spirit being housed in our human bodies. And then that crown, the victor's crown. You know, that victor's crown is something that we have right now. But we're gonna have it for sure. We're gonna have that salvation when we see God, when we go to Him. So we just keep walking, we keep running actually that race. But it says we get that glory and honor. We have the dominion over the creation, as we see in Genesis 1. And then disgrace, right? Not all of creation is under our control because we cannot control self. So we have a problem with our self, which leads us to sin. Well, now let's look at the second part of this. It brings us to that second division of thought. Does anybody have any comments about man? Does anybody have any comments about that? We talked about in the very beginning about man. Okay. Well, let's move on. Let's look at verse 9. We know that our remedy for our problem with sin or self is Jesus. So look at verse 9. The Hebrew writer draws a contrast now. He's going to draw a contrast between the ordinary man and Christ. All things including death, which the one thing is not yet subjected to man, which verse 8 talked about there. Jesus willingly included death because he had to die on the cross. He had to be in submission to the Father. And of course, one day we know that we're all going to die. So let's look at the first part of verse 9 here. Somebody read the first part of verse 9, to namely Jesus.
But we see him who for a little while was made lower than the angels, namely Jesus.
All right. So now it's going to shift. It's shifting our minds. Man, and the first one, us, mankind, are created a little lower than the angels. And now it says, for a little while, it says, namely Jesus was, right? It's going to shift from mankind in general, we can't control ourselves, into Jesus. Jesus was created a little lower than the angels for a little while. Just for a little while. We know that Jesus was also man. We know that in John chapter 1. He was in the flesh, John chapter 1 and verse 14. God in the flesh. The Spirit became flesh. He was the Word. But he became for a while, he was a little lower than the angels. How is that? How is he? See, verses 7 and 9, Jesus in the flesh, going to the cross, dying in the flesh. Didn't that make him a little lower than the angels? Huh?
Because he was in flesh.
Yeah, he was in the flesh, and so he had to die, and so he went to the cross. And so that is the reason that Jesus was created, it was for a while a little lower than the angels. Absolutely. Absolutely submitted to the Father. And that gives us that example that we need to do the very same. Verse 9, second part, he goes on to say, Jesus, more than a man, right? Superior to the angels. And it says this, because what? Because of his suffering death. There it is. Because of his suffering death. Crown him. Crown him with glory and honor. And so by the grace of God, he might taste death for everyone. Jesus living as a man. God's Spirit living in a human body. Us. Spirit living in a human body. But now Jesus is the one who's crowned with glory and honor. He's crowned with that Stephanos. But it's different than our Stephanos, isn't it? Why? Why would his be different than ours? Speak. Yeah, and did we die for him? It's because of his what? His suffering death for each and every one of us. Yeah, he tasted death for every single person. Nobody has done that. Nobody can do that. And he was given that crown of victory. He was already victorious over self. We can't be victorious over self. We have that problem. And the Bible tells us that Jesus knew no sin, right? Jesus was the only person who was ever sinless. No guile found in his mouth. Let's repeat this, 1 Peter 2, 22 and 25. Oh, I got that right. No, let's try to be. First Peter 2. Let me get that wrong. Yeah, 22. But I'll read the whole thing. Who committed no sin, nor was deceit found in his mouth. And then he says in verse 23, and while being reviled, he did not revile in return. While suffering, he uttered no threats, but kept entrusting himself to him who judges righteously. Verse 24, and he himself bore our sins in his body on the cross, so that we might die to sin and live to righteousness. For by his wounds we were healed, right? You were healed. Verse 25, for you were continually straying like sheep, but now you have returned to the shepherd and the guardian of your souls. Isn't that beautiful? And Jesus knew no sin in what he has done for us. That we're able to go to him. We're able to walk with him. We have that blood of Christ. We once were strayed like sheep, straying sheep, but now we have returned to that shepherd. Like it says in John chapter 10, the sheep hear the great shepherd's voice. He's the guardian of our souls. Hebrews chapter 4 and verse 15 says he was tempted in all ways, in all ways that we are yet without sin. As a result, he went to the cross and he died through that suffering. And death was a conduit of God's grace. God's grace. You have all hope of salvation and peace to know we have a Savior who's died on our behalf. Have you ever heard, I'm sure you have, that grace, when it's acrostic, what grace means? So you have the G, the R, the A, the C, and the E, and then each letter means something. I think it's acrostic, right? Is that acrostic?
Yes.
God's riches at Christ's expense. And so that's what grace is. Number one, mankind. Number two, give a crown, has dominion over all the creation. Number three, disgrace, does not have control over self. That was the first part. Then we have Jesus. Jesus as a man, right? God in the flesh, 100% God, 100% man. His crown was the victory, having control over self, being sinless. And the result is the last one here. We're going to look at the grace of God. And we're just past, or should I keep, it's 40 after, about now? Okay. So we're going to pick up with number 3, the grace of God, starting verse 10 all the way through 18 next week. And then we'll finish up pretty quickly. And then we'll go over the questions. So keep your questions with you. And then we will go over the questions and then start in chapter 3 next Wednesday. Does anybody have any comments about this? Any questions or comments? All right. Thank you so much.